When you think of the greatest centers of all time, Shaquille O'Neal, Kareem, and Bill always come up. But what if I told you that it wasn't any of them and that it was Hakeem the Dream? Before we begin, let us get this out of the way. Yes, Kareem's accolades look very impressive when you go on Wikipedia and see what he's accomplished. And yes, mainstream media has told people from a young age that Kareem is the greatest center ever and is a top 5 player ever. And most people tend to just go with the flow. Also, let's not forget that Hakeem doesn't carry as big of a name brand or the Laker title to his legacy as Shaq and Kareem do. I'm about to give you a ton of arguments for why Hakeem is the greatest center of all time and why it is improper to judge players based solely on popular opinion, which frequently lacks sufficient context. Before we get into the comparisons, I want to drop this stat line since some people only look at stats. Hakeem is the only player in NBA history to record 200 blocks and 200 steals in a single season. He's also the only center to rank in the top 10 all-time in steals and blocks. He was a defensive monster. With that being said, let the comparison battles begin. We are going to start by quickly eliminating Shaquille O'Neal from this equation. He's much easier to eliminate in this scenario than Kareem because he and Hakeem have played in the same era and head-to-head on the biggest stage against each other. Shaq was the more dominant interior force due to his size and physicality, but Hakeem was the better all-around player due to his ability to score from various spots, and he is one of the best defenders of all time due to his elite rim protection and post defense. Let us start with the NBA Finals series in 1995, in which the two faced off. 1 seed Orlando was favored ahead of the 6 seed Houston in that series, but Hakeem had an all-time great final series, recording about 36 points, 12 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 blocks, and 2 steals per game. Although Shaq performed great in that series as well, recording 28 points, 13 rebounds, 6 assists, and 3 blocks, he had a much better supporting cast around him, which allowed him to be more effective as he would have less defensive attention. With all of that taken into consideration, Hakeem not only beat him with a worse supporting cast, but swept him as well. Moving on, let us talk about the situation and competition. Before getting Phil Jackson as his head coach, along with another top 10 player, Kobe Bryant, in LA, Shaq was not a very successful playoff performer. He was swept 5 times before the year 2000, which is the most in the modern era. It isn't like he lost the series by battling it out to the end. He got swept 5 times in 6 years, and for the majority of those years, he had pretty good teams built around him. There can be multiple reasons why this is the case. It could be that Shaq wasn't a very good leader. He needed a great coach along with a top 10 player to succeed, or the easiest of these reasons to prove, and the fact that he had to face much more dominant centers before the year 2000. He faced big men such as Hakeem, Karl Malone, Tim Duncan, and David Robinson, and repeatedly got swept by them. How convenient is it that he dominated right after all the dominant centers of the 1990s either got old or retired? I haven't even mentioned how Tim Duncan outplayed him in 1999 or 2003, or how Ben Wallace shut him down in the 2004 NBA Finals. With all of this, we can conclude that Shaq couldn't get the job done against truly dominant big men, whereas Hakeem did against players like Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, and finally Shaq himself. Now, I find this issue much easier to debate, but most will not even recognize the debate because they automatically assume Kareem is better just by looking at his accolades. Kareem's resume looks great. He has 6 rings and 6 MVPs. He's the all-time leading scorer. And he has 10 first-team All-NBA appearances. But too often, people look at these accolades and don't back them up with any context whatsoever. It was in 1971 when he and Oscar Robertson captured the first title in Milwaukee Bucks history. His 66-16 first seed Bucks faced the 41-win Warriors, the 48-win Lakers without Jerry West, and the 42-win Bullets in the finals. Many people might have never known that the competition he faced during that title run was this bad, and that it didn't take much from him to win that title. Now let us get to his Laker titles. Kareem was traded to the Lakers in 1975 and didn't win any championships until they drafted Magic Johnson in 1980. He had another top 10 player of all time on his roster in Magic Johnson, a top 3 coach of all time in Pat Riley on the bench, aiding him along the way, and other great players like Jamal Wilkes, Michael Cooper, and Norm Nixon, all of whom were all-stars around that time and in their careers. His Laker teams later got even more depth by adding former MVP Bob McAdoo, Hall of Famer James Worthy, and All-Star guard Byron Scott. Hell, the Lakers were so good that they won the 1980 championship without Kareem even playing. Now let us get to the competition Hakeem had to face during his championship runs. In 1994, he went against the 47-win Blazers, 56-win Suns, 53-win Jazz, and the 57-win Knicks. Some notable big men he faced were Clifford Robinson, Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, Charles Oakley, and Patrick Ewing, with 3 out of the 5 being Hall of Famers and some of the best big men to ever play the game. In 1995, he faced even tougher competition than he did in 1994. He faced the 60-win Jazz, 59-win Suns, 62-win Spurs, and 57-win Orlando Magic. He faced Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, David Robinson, Dennis Rodman, and Shaquille O'Neal, all of whom are some of the greatest big men ever, and he beat all of them. In both of those playoff runs combined, he faced 3 all-defensive first-team players in his positional matchups. Not to mention he did all of this in '95 as a 6 seed with 47 wins, and his only other consistently reliable option was Clyde Drexler, whom he acquired during the middle of the season and was still productive but out of his prime. The reason I believe Bill isn't in the conversation for the greatest center of all time with Hakeem is that his era was so much different, and the rules of his era made it much easier for a big man to dominate. There was no three-point line, which made spacing much less of a problem and allowed more of the points to be generated through the big man on offense, as long-range shots were less effective, and you had a lower percentage of making them. It is not a knock against his greatness, but more so because we can't compare 2 very different styles of the same game, and we have to take a look at each player's situation. And the situation for big men like Russell and Chamberlain was drastically different than the situations faced by Hakeem Abdul-Jabbar and O'Neal. Let me know what you think. Is Dream the greatest center of all time?